Anybody ever lose anything? I know there's probably somebody in the room, well, I never lose things. But for the rest of us, occasionally things get misplaced. I was working through the passage the other week, and I thought back into my recent past. Again, some people are like, well, I just never lose anything. And I don't, well, if you can't relate, then just tune this part out. But for the rest of us, a few weeks back, I was on my way out to a meeting with some leaders in the community. And earlier that morning, I had to run an errand that I didn't expect to run, that I wasn't anticipating. And it broke up my routine. And so I'm seeing some heads nod, so you're beginning to track with me. And so I had to run an errand, so I jumped in my truck and I went out and I took care of whatever I needed to do, and I came back to the house and came over and got a few things done because I needed to knock out a few things here at the church. And then I had this meeting with some leaders in the community. And when I went to go for my meeting, I went in to the key hook in the kitchen to get my keys, to get in my truck to go, and they wasn't there. Does that sound relatable to anybody? Don't point. That's not polite. But it seems like if you lose something, you don't really know that you have lost it until you need it. Like I went and I ran my errand and I got back and I didn't think anything about it till I was ready to go. And then when I went to go find what I needed, I couldn't find it. And I panicked a little bit. And I began to search every surface in the kitchen. I began to look under every surface in the kitchen. I began to work room by room by room, looking high and looking low and thinking, where did I put my keys? And I finally found that when I ran my errand, I ran in and picked up something that I needed over here. And when I did, I picked it up off the dresser and I just put my keys down and headed on. And so they weren't where they were supposed to be. Now that's shame on me. But it's something that seems like an awful lot of us do. We lose things, we misplace things, and then when we need them, we come into a panic and we begin to search high and low. When you need it right then. And it becomes the highest priority in your life at that time. Now, God knows what that's like, because there are some folks that are lost. Jesus in Luke 15, he tells three stories, three parables, we call them. Stories that are there to teach us a lesson, that are to cast some truth right alongside some reality that the listeners around him could relate to. And in Luke 15, Jesus tells these three parables of lostness. You see, Jesus had come to a point in his ministry where he was getting to be popular. And the crowds were beginning to swell and seek him out. And the thing about the crowds was there was an awful lot of folks in the crowds that were just not your religious folks. They were just not the right kind of folks. You see, Jesus had begun a ministry and he began to draw people back to God that were not the right kind of folks. And so the folks that would follow Jesus, some of them had deep addictions. Some of them were criminals. Some of them were prostitutes. Some of them were diseased. All kinds of folks began to come and to follow after Jesus, and Jesus constantly pointed them to their Father. And this crowd was in awe of the working and the moving and the restoring and the power of God in their life. And everybody was happy except the people who were of the right religious crowd. And their response was they were mad. They tested him. They confronted him. They grumbled and they complained. All these people who hadn't spent all their lives reading and studying the Torah were coming to God, and they were upset because they had devoted their lives to the things of God. Jesus had made it clear that that's what he was doing. He was restoring the lost to the Father. And these who should have been excited were not. And so they began to be critical of Jesus. And in the middle of this, Jesus tells these three stories. He talks about these sheep where there are 100 sheep and 99 are right where they're supposed to be, but there's one who wandered off. And he tells the parable about how the shepherd goes and he leaves the 99 and he goes off in search of the one who had wandered off. Then next tells a parable about a woman who has lost a coin somewhere in her home. And then he tells a story about a man who has two sons. And one son takes his inheritance and leaves and goes off to a foreign land, spends and wastes his life, becomes lost, and comes back home. I'm going to look at this second story in Luke 15, this second parable in Luke 15, this parable about a coin. And Jesus says, or what woman? See, he's connecting these parables. They're related to one another. He tells a story about the sheep, and then he says, or what woman, having 10 silver coins, if she loses one coin, does not light a lamp and sweep the house and seek diligently until she finds it? What sane person, when they have a meeting that they need to go to and they can't find the keys to their truck, does not search high and low everywhere in that house to find what they need? It says, what woman, if she's lost a coin, does not light a lamp and sweep the house and seek diligently until she finds it? And when she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors. You know, I didn't do that when I found my keys. I guess next time expect a phone tree and we'll rejoice. And when she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I had lost. Just so I tell you, there is joy before the angels of God over one sinner who repents. There are three things I want to bring out about this story. One of them, the story doesn't tell us why this coin is lost. It doesn't tell us the circumstance. How did this coin go missing? There's been a lot of discussion, a lot of thought about how this coin would be so important and how it went missing. It's evident that she doesn't suspect that somebody has taken the coin because she looks in the house. So most people think that the coin disappeared either because she misplaced it or had forgotten where she put it or something along those lines, that something has gone missing through misuse or neglect. But it doesn't go into any of that. Why is this coin so valuable? Well, maybe the woman had a debt that she needed to pay and she was looking for her coins. And when she finds that one is missing, she goes into a panic. Maybe this particular coin had tremendous value about this time. A drachma would represent about a day's wage. That's a pretty significant amount of money. And maybe this particular coin that she's looking for out of sheer necessity, she needs it. And if she didn't have it, maybe she and her family would go hungry. So she's looking desperately. How many of us would just brush it off if we had worked all day and got our check and then couldn't find it when we got home? Another possibility that was very popular at this time was that the particular coin had some sentimental value attached to it. It was not uncommon that when women would get married, that this would be part of their bridal apparel. That it had value because it was connected to her wedding attire. When a woman got married, she took 10 silver coins and sewed them together as part of a headdress. And it could be that as she was looking at this piece of her wedding garment, that she noticed that one of these coins was missing. Now, if you had a wedding band, which is sort of our modern equivalent, and it was studded with diamonds, and you noticed that one of those had fallen out, that one of those was missing, you might understand some sentimental attachment to this, that it is part of something that is very important to her, and she begins to search her house. She's not going to just concede the fact that, well, I've still got 9. She begins to look for the one. When one of the set is missing, the fact that you have 9 doesn't comfort you very much because it's not complete. She's missing it. Whatever the reason, this coin was lost. Something of financial value or something of emotional value. For whatever reason, it was lost. But it wasn't lost somewhere out there like the sheep was. It was lost at home. It was lost in a very familiar place. She knew every inch of that house probably. And right here in the middle of this familiar place, something has gone missing. The coin didn't wander off. Wasn't like a sheep, doesn't have legs. It was missing at home. It was in a place of safety and security. Yet when she went to find it, it wasn't there. She discovers that it's missing. It creates a flurry of activity. Jesus was bringing lost people who were lost out there. Jesus was bringing them back to the Father. He was bringing people that had been separated by sin and by their lifestyles of sin. And he was bringing them, restoring them back to a loving, merciful Father. He was bringing the tax collectors and the prostitutes and the lepers and the murderers and the immoral, the alcoholics, the demon-possessed, and those who were just burned out on religion. He was bringing them back home. And yet, as he was bringing them back home, there were people who felt that they were already a part of the house of God who had a problem. They were lost, and they were already at home. Sometimes we find ourselves in situations like this. Sometimes we find folks in our families like this who are sort of right where they need to be, and yet they're detached and opposed to God. Jesus is saying those of God's house, those of the Jewish household, they need salvation just like everybody else does. Instead of grumbling, they ought be rejoicing. They needed to understand that they were lost and that they too needed to be found. They were the sheep who had never left the fold. They were the 99. And yet they were grumbling because of the sheep who had wandered off were coming back home. They were still where they needed to be. They still read the Torah every day and did all the rituals and all the right things. But they were far from God in their hearts. Lostness takes many forms. In any case, they were out of spiritual circulation. They were of no use in the kingdom. Do you have something lost at home? Do you have someone who's lost at home? Do you have folks in your surroundings that seem to be opposed to God? They can quote the Bible at you really, really well, but their hearts seem to be far from God. You know, it's easy for us to be angry with folks like that. Sometimes we complain. Well, they ought to blah, 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 blah. It's easy to be angry. But then that brings lostness in us. Then we become like those Pharisees who were grumbly and complaining. Jesus says this is a problem. Sometimes we have folks that we've brought up in the faith. We've provided them the Word of God. We've taught with them. We've prayed with them. And then life and circumstance or whatever reason, they wander. They not wander with an O, but wander with an A. They wander from the Lord. Instead of being filled with resentment and grumbling, we need to be frantically searching, seeking, looking for their return. Lost means being away from safety and in a place of danger. For the sheep, that was out in the wild. For the coin, that's at home. Lost is any time you are where you don't need to be. Lost is not really knowing where you belong or how to get there. We've got some folks in our families that are like that. Lost is waking up one day and realizing that among the most valuable treasures in your family, the members of your family, one of them is missing. Millions like that. What does this woman do? Well, she doesn't shrug it off. She launches a flurry of activity. Just like when I had to go to that meeting and I couldn't find my keys, I got busy. And when we encounter lostness in our families, it's easy to be angry and upset, but this woman doesn't display the anger and upset. What she does is she gets to work. And the first thing she does is that she lights a lamp. She realized that something was lost, and so she lights a lamp. Now, this was during a time when there wasn't electricity in the home. It wasn't like you kept the lights and the AC running 24 hours a day. She had to go and light a lamp and move it around. When we encounter lostness, when we find lostness in our life, we need to light a lamp. It's easy to point fingers. It's easy to give accusations. It's easy to talk about, well, if they had only done. But what the woman does is she shines a light on the situation. And in our lives, we need light. The Word of God is the light. Jesus is called the light. He is the light who has come. Instead of pointing fingers, let's be illuminated with the light of Christ Himself. You know, it's very difficult to change folks, but when you get together with God, great change can happen within your life. You're more effective in spending your time with the Lord to bring change in your own life than you are changing the people around you. She lights a lamp. She begins to have some illumination. She begins to shine a light around her home. I'm reminded that in the Bibles earlier, in Matthew chapter 5, in the early part of the Sermon on the Mount, He tells the disciples that they are to be salt and light to the world. Light dispels darkness. It removes, it causes the enemy to flee. Lord, set us on fire. Let the lamp of God burn brightly within His church. It's being upset and angry. Let us be filled with the light of Jesus Christ. She lights a lamp. What does that look like for you? Well, instead of pointing fingers, how's your relationship with Jesus? How's your prayer life doing? Are we complaining or are we praying? Are we repeating what our friends told us to do in the situation, or are we rehearsing what the Word of God tells us to do in the situation? Light a lamp. The first thing she does is she begins to light a lamp. Not only does she light a lamp, she begins to sweep the house. Now these houses, they probably had dirt floors, and stuff gets covered up in the dirt. Maybe this coin had come detached from that headdress, or maybe that coin was sitting on a counter somewhere, or maybe she thought she put it back where it was supposed to go and she laid it on a counter somewhere or on a desk somewhere and it got knocked off on the floor. She begins to go to work. She begins to sweep, to uncover any dirt. She uses the light to move it around and to look. She takes the broom and she begins to clean house. In our lives, we might need to clean some house. In our lives, we need the Spirit of God to work and to clean us. We can get advice from here and we can get advice from there, but are we taking our direction from the Word of God? She lit a lamp. She swept the house. Then she began to search. She began to search. She thought about all the ways of finding this coin and where that coin might be that she could think of. And she devoted herself to finding it. She took the lamp and she took the broom and she started in one corner of the house. She began to work her way across. When we encounter lostness in our life, do we devote ourselves to the restoration of that person in prayer? You know, it's very difficult for you to change somebody else, but God can do it in a moment. Do we believe in the power of God anymore? It's easy to cry out to God and complain. But do we cry out to God to recover, to restore? The Lord was already up to that. He was already bringing people who are far from God back into the fold. And he said, look, you scribes and you Pharisees, you big dummies, why are you not rejoicing in what God is doing? You need to light a lamp, you need to clean your house, and you need to be on the same mission that I'm on and begin to search diligently and draw people back to the Father. Why are you grumbling? Why are you complaining? We turn on our news programs and we talk about how America is falling apart. We pick up our newspaper and we begin to grumble and complain about how things are. Why don't we light our lamp? Why don't we begin to sweep our house? And why don't we begin to search diligently and cry out to God who can actually begin to do something in the lives of people? We must search. We must expend energy. We need to hold nothing back. She didn't quit until she found this coin. What a revelation of the heart of God. He cares for lost coins who are lost in the middle of houses right where they're supposed to be. Not only does God have a heart for the broken who are out there, but he has a heart for the broken who are right here, who grew up in Christian homes, who grew up hearing the Word of God, that God still loves them. God longs to see how the lost are covered. His heart is toward the lost. Jesus came to seek and to save the lost. Whether they're lost out there or whether they're lost right here. He wants to bring them back to a place of relationship and safety within the fold. What I find interesting is at no point in the parable is there a question of why the coin was lost to begin with. In essence, it's like that question doesn't really matter. The question is, what do you do as they're being found? What do you do as the coin's being found? And what does the woman do? She finds the coin and she calls her friends. And they rejoice, that they have joy when the lost is recovered. Not grumbling, not complaining, not saying, well, I told you so, not saying, well, if you'd have listened to me, not saying, well, if you hadn't have just wandered off the way you want. None of that. They rejoiced. The house was filled with joy. Verse 10, just so I tell you, there is joy before the angels of God over one sinner who repents. It doesn't matter from where that sinner has come. God and his angels, they rejoice when the lost come home. We talk about degrees of lostness. It doesn't matter. See, the thing is, we all come to the Father the same way, from a place of lostness. The church and the house of God, who are we? To say, oh, well, shame on you, because all of us were lost. That's what the gospel is all about. That God began restoring all of humanity through his Son, Jesus Christ, all who were far from God. That means me. And that means you. And that means that coin. And that means that child. That means that family member. That means that wife. That means that husband. That means that crazy uncle. That means that neighbor who gives you fits. That sinner, when they come to the Lord, from that place of brokenness, there's rejoicing. There's rejoicing. There's joy when a sinner comes and repents. It brings joy to God. It brings joy to all of heaven when we begin to diligently pursue those who are lost. In your life, what is lost? I believe probably there's some names, some faces that popped up in our mind. I know that was true for me. When I read about the lost coin, I think of people that I care about. Maybe this morning as you hear the lost coin, you wonder if maybe you're that lost coin. Does God really care about me? You know, I grew up in this church. You know, I grew up and I heard the messages. I've done all the things. I've been to summer camp. I've gone down to the altar. I've done this and I've done that. And now I can't even find my prayers to make their way out of my room. Does God even love me or care for me anymore? Is there any value in me? The parable, yes. Yes. He does. He does.